Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HSS Mental Health Committee's very first podcast, where we'll be discussing content, tips, and resources to help the Queens community foster positive well-being. My name is Cameron.
And my name is Amy, and today we're joined with guests from Step Above Stigma to discuss the topic of myths and misconceptions. To start off, could you please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about Step Above Stigma?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us here today. So, my name is Ampai, and this is my co lead, Hailey, and we are the CEO and president of Step Above Stigma. Step Above Stigma, we are a Canadian registered charity that is dedicated to empowering young adults to break the stigmas that say that they are unworthy. For us and for our community, SAS is a home that empowers young adults to critically question the social norms and step above the stigmas that prevent them from having good mental health. So at SAS, our saying and our deepest belief is that empowerment is the antidote to stigma.
Yeah, and I can also just chime in on that. So with Step Above Stigma, we do a lot of different initiatives to promote mental health and empower youth and young adults across Canada. So the first thing that we do is our chapters program. That's essentially how we originated as a charity, was at Queen's University. So I know Ampai, she started this as originally a little club, which is super cool. And I joined probably 7 or 8 months later because I saw it on campus, and it started to blossom into something bigger. And so now we have 4 different chapters across Canada. So we have them at York, Western, Guelph, and then also at Queen still. And now we're kind of growing into something bigger. Outside of our chapters now, for the past year, we've been innovating, and we're currently developing our empowerment labs, which is a really cool workshop program we're trying to do for not only schools, but also corporations, so we can help young emerging leaders in the workplace to empower themselves to achieve positive mental health. Another thing we also do is we're working on a corporate case competition. So we're hoping to empower employees to take an entrepreneurial lens to enhance other employees' mental health in the workplace. And another thing that Ampai can probably speak to more so is our BIPOC Cloud initiative. So I'll hand it over to you, Ampai.
Oh, awesome. Perfect. So, our BIPOC Cloud initiative, I found personally that there's been such a dearth in resources for the Black, Indigenous, people of color community when it comes to mental health. And that was one of the largest motivators when we were working to build Step Above Stigma. There aren't enough resources that specifically serve the BIPOC communities. So what we're looking to start hopefully within the next year or two are some community building workshops. So in these workshops, we're going to have first a bonding component where BIPOC youth can come together and do an activity like dance or the arts in a specific culture. And then we're going to move into more of a support group / learning style community group where youth will have the opportunity to learn new mental health skills or even just life skills in general that help with mental health, like financial literacy and things like that. We all know that, in school they taught us y equals mx plus b, but they didn't teach us about taxes. And I know that that was on my mental health personally. So we're going to try and build all these components together into one incredible series of workshops. And then at the end, of course, we're going to conclude with some food and some drinks.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. We just had like a follow-up question based on that. When you're like when you're building resources for certain populations, is there anything that you're specifically looking for based on how to best like create good effects for that population?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most important thing is connections and research. So for us, of course, if we don't have individuals on our team who are specifically a part of that community, we're not going to be infiltrating and being going to go say, oh, we know best about how to serve your community. That's absolutely the opposite of the approach that we take at Step Above Stigma. And so we make sure that all of our resources are specifically tailored from direct lived experience and research and direct personal connections with communities. So for example, I'm a part of the Black and the Asian community. And so whenever we're developing resources, we always ensure that they're done completely in collaboration and co-created by individuals within those communities and thoroughly researched.
Yeah, and I could also just jump in to add that as like the leaders of Step Above Stigma, to us, we really want to feel like empathetic to the person we're targeting. So essentially we're building out solutions almost a little bit for ourselves a bit. Originally we were only targeting students, but as Ampai and I have both graduated from Queen's University a couple of years ago, we realized there's like a whole other market out there that are still young people, but they aren't students. So that's why we kind of also decided to go the corporate route as well, because there's a huge need for mental health support in that major early career transition. So that's also another part of it. It's like really important to us that we're really passionate about the solution we're building out. And to be passionate, we really feel that we need to relate to that solution and feel that it can actually benefit us as well.
Yeah, I think that's so amazing. I think it's really important to be able to actually relate to the audience and to use their lived experiences. So if Cameron wants to branch off on that.
Yeah, we were just gonna say for the next question, what would you say are the most common myths about mental health, especially among university students, and how would this contribute to the large stigma surrounding mental health that affects the ability to get support?
There's so many. Where do
Or
we
maybe we could focus on like your targeted population, like how you're focusing on the BIPOC population.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, I'll let Ampai speak to the BIPOC population because of her like research around
Yeah, absolutely.
that target area, but I can speak to some like more general ones, something that I personally experienced, and obviously there's probably so much more out there as well that maybe I'm not even aware of because I never personally experienced it. But at least in my first year, I think a huge issue is that a lot of people, particularly at Queen's and like I guess at all universities in general, we all come in highly driven. We're very ambitious. We have most likely had high grades. We're really, we just come in, yeah, very highly driven. And so getting accommodations for most people was never a thing before university. And because the pressures and demands and like ever-changing environment of university, a lot of the time people feel weak for using accommodations. And for myself personally, in my first year, for my midterms, I had the opportunity to use accommodations and I didn't, solely for the reason that I thought it was going to make me appear weak, or I didn't deserve them. So I think that's a huge myth that like many university students get. I know a lot of people can't even get accommodations because the whole system is super flawed, but I think a lot of people, at least on my side, who've had the opportunity to use accommodations and have it, has to do with that stigma around weakness. Another thing too that kind of goes hand in hand with that is this idea of you have to get good grades to get the most stellar job of your dreams. As someone who graduated, I know Ampai can attest to this too, is that you really don't need that high of grades to do what you want to do. I think a huge like conception for me was I had to get high 90s in order to like land my dream job. And quite actually, I got all like 50s in my first year of university, and still managed to get what I wanted. And I think the most important thing there was ensuring I was well-rounded throughout school. So I think that was kind of a myth that is often portrayed, that you have to get really high grades, get on the dean's list, all these things to get what you want. And that's honestly BS in my opinion. So those are kind of two that I thought of. I have more, about let Ampai speak to more so on the BIPOC side.
Yeah, no, Hailey, that was such a good point. That's something that I experienced as well. I'm in a job search now, and not a single person has looked at my grades, not one. And I cried over them so many times to try and make them perfect. So thank you for bringing that up. But I'd say the biggest myth on the BIPOC side, and I'll speak specifically for the research I've done on the Black and Asian communities, are the myth that we don't struggle with our mental health as much because we have the strong minority status stereotypes pushed upon us, like the strong Black woman stereotype, the strong Black man stereotype, and the model minority stereotypes in the Asian community. And those are really damaging because, first of all, within our cultures, it makes it sometimes seem that, you're not allowed to struggle because our ancestors have had to be so strong to get us to where we are today, to battle all of the systemic barriers that they've had to battle. And so nowadays it's, my dad's a first generation immigrant. It's it's a point of pride for me to be strong for my family, seeing after everything that they've done to give me the opportunities that I have today. But deep down inside, I feel broken, um, quite often throughout my daily life, and it's something that I struggle with. But I'll just speak to my personal experience instead of the research now. It's one of those things where I've also always felt like, I had to live up to a certain expectation. And I think the myth there is that, you know, if you are a part of, either of these communities, you're not allowed to struggle with your mental health, or you can't struggle with your mental health, and that's absolutely not true. Um, Another really important part of this is that, in the mental health sphere in general, the resources are so scarce for people in the BIPOC community. It's really challenging to speak with a mental health professional about an issue that pertains to your ethnicity that, they can't relate to. And of course, every mental health professional I've ever been to has been so phenomenal and has been able to empathize, but it's never the same as lived experience. And so something that I'd really like to see in this department is to see resources be built out specifically for the BIPOC community. So we're going to start from a community-based standpoint with that, but what I would love to see more of is more of a systemic approach so that those resources are provided top down.
Yeah, that's really true. I know, especially coming from an Asian family, mental health was kind of like a gray area where we didn't really talk about it. I think, especially for me, I felt more comfortable talking about it because my sisters were talking about it.
Yeah.
And especially talking to like the older generations, it's a lot scarier than talking to someone who's in your own generation. Like I felt a lot more comfortable talking to my sisters, for example, than talking to my mom or my dad. So like that's kind of leading to a follow-up question for the people who don't have um, others and family members and friends that are in their own age group. What would you suggest um, to relieve the pressure sort of to talk to older generations who may not see mental health as a pressing issue in our society today?
Oh, absolutely. So I'd say the biggest help, and I'll speak for myself personally, and from what I've seen has really helped our communities. Resources like Good to Talk and the Kids Help Phone are fantastic. I know that for many they can be stigmatized, but for example, I've had weeks where I've called Good to Talk pretty much every day, and they've never shamed me once for continually calling in. In fact, they encouraged me to keep calling in, for any issue, big or small. And so I'd really say that resources like that are fantastic because they're anonymous, but it's like an hour of free and accessible therapy that you can get at any time during the day. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend a resource like that because you can call from the anonymity of your home from anywhere you want, hop in your car if you just need to be alone and you have housemates that are listening in, or try to find any private space if like many students you don't have a car, things like that. It's just really important to try and find a space where you can just give them a call because I found them to be absolutely pivotal for my mental health.
Yeah, I think that's a really great resource. We'll definitely look into adding that onto our resource guide on our Instagram page. Just branching off on that topic in general, and on those myths that you mentioned, what do you think can be done to sort of dispute those myths and just overall break the stigma just generally?
That is a huge question. And honestly, like personally, I don't have all the answers, but I guess I can answer it from a lens of like what I wish would have happened for me instead. Um, I was in a program that at least for me, I felt like I didn't really fit the mold of my program and the way my program at Queens was designed. It just felt like you had to be super highly intense all the time, and you had to just like you had to be able to maintain a level of stamina and rigor all the time, and that was honestly just encouraged also by the students. I was in commerce, so I'm sure if you are both in commerce, I feel like I saw that on your LinkedIn. No? Okay. No, okay, cool. Anyways, I was in commerce, and so there's obviously like a high level of stamina in that program. So I think it kind of starts with like one person really encouraging the help it's a network effect for me. I think if had one person said, oh, you should take that accommodation that counselor offered for me, I would have actually done it. But at the same time, like most of the people around me are just like, oh, just get it over with, get the midterm over with, that kind of stuff. So I think, again, it is a network effect, and it just takes one person to say something. And then in terms of like, you have to get good grades, I think that again is something that's probably throughout all programs in general, that you have to show your proof of grades at employers and that kind of stuff. And I just wish that information was just kind of more so. Obviously your employers want to, or your professors want you to succeed, but I think they need to redefine that success such that they encourage well-roundedness rather than getting high 90s. So I think that that's something that could really eliminate that stigma there, is rather than striving to be something that may most likely be unattainable and something that's going to really impact your mental health, aspire to be authentic and to be you and to try your best, but also like you don't have to attach your self-worth and moral to grades. So obviously that's something I wish had have been said to me in my first year, and it wasn't. And it took me 3.5 years to figure it out. And by that point, I was so over it at that point. But I'll let Ampai speak to the next one.
Amazing. Yeah. So I think for me, when it comes to something as large as breaking the stigma, it can be so intimidating for anybody, no matter your experience and your history. And so I think the biggest point for me is to start small, One thing that I love within advocacy work and support is that there's such a gradient to it, and everyone can do something, whatever it means, if that means serving others or doing something to better serve yourself. Taking a little reflection on who you are, what you think that you've needed, that you've been missing, and then if you have any special skills that you have that could lend to a movement like the mental health stigma breaking that we're all trying to work towards. So, are you an artist? Do you like doing little graphic designs? Do you love to perform? Are you someone who is highly technically skilled? And thinking about ways that you can utilize those talents to make a difference in a movement like the mental health movement, for example. But most importantly, I think it's really crucial to start small and to remember that the small things that you do have an impact, whether that's for yourself or for others. So, for example, if you're trying to become less of a perfectionist, like Hailey talked about, starting small by validating yourself for being nicer to yourself. That's something that I'm personally trying to work on. So I think it's really crucial to remember that every small step is important. And even if you revert in to negativity again, and if you revert back into a dark hole and you feel like you're continually learning the same lessons again and again and again, remembering that sometimes you need to do that because you've had habits ingrained in you for 20 years. It doesn't take 6 months and 5 tries to sometimes work on these different mental health patterns that are exceptionally challenging, especially when it comes to things like coaching, therapy, and mental illness.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna jump in on that, Ampai. I think you said a really good point about starting small, and I think why I thought this question was so large, because my first instinct was trying to eliminate public stigma. And obviously public stigma is like this whole larger concept, like the stigmas that are floating around in society, stereotypes, all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, that's going to take years, if not centuries, to eliminate some stereotypes that exist. So what you can do is eliminate the self-stigmas that you possess, so the beliefs you have about yourself, about what you have to or should do to be successful in order to be happy. But I think that's where our whole mission of the empowerment is the antidote to stigma comes into play. And it's about really self-empowerment and like empowering yourself to do the things you genuinely love in the face of fear, genuinely empowering yourself to go after what you want, no matter what anyone else says. And I think it's important too that at times those stigmas will come into your mind. Like we're not immune to self-stigmas, we're not immune to negativity. But I think feeling those feelings that come in and letting those thoughts just kind of like ebb and flow, but not let them impact your behaviors, that's how you're gonna be able to empower yourself to do what you want in life. So yeah, I'll just conclude that there.
Well
Thank you
said.
so much for that. So just in regards to, I know you said you were talking about grades. So Cameron and I are actually both in the health sciences program.
Gotcha.
No worries. I know a lot of students in this program are looking to apply to postgraduate programs or professional programs, whether that be something like medical school, pharmacy school. So in terms of those, there's often a lot of pressure to get those high grades to get into these professional schools. So I was wondering if you had any advice for that specific situation.
Ampai, I'll let you speak to that since you just did your master's.
Oh yeah, let's go. All right. So first of all, I did kinesiology and health studies, and then I studied mental health in the Health/Human Geography department, looking into ways that we can make the mental health care system more accessible and inclusive for Black students at Queen's. But during this experience, I will tell you that, you know, if if I got below a certain slightly inaccessible range, I would be crying in my room. I would be thinking that I would never have the future that I wanted. And it was a really negative experience. And I think the biggest thing throughout this process, and it's something that I'm also trying to continually work on, is something called, of course, the growth mindset when it comes to grades and grade development. And so I'm not sure how you personally, the two of you, I'd also love to hear your input on this sometime, work through the grades if and when they aren't what you hope they'd be. But I know on myself, I used to beat myself up so much, and I used to just be so hard on myself, and I'd be like, okay, the harder I am on myself, the better chance I'm going to have at getting better grades, because I know that, if I criticize myself so much, I'll learn from this and then I'll do better. But that wasn't the case. I find for me, the thing that helped me continually improve was to really try my best to look at every single grade and analyze it very deeply for reasons why, it wasn't what I hoped it would be, and then just try to my best to learn from it and re-strategize and reframe in order to try and do better. But I think one of the hardest things with this is that, it comes in so fast. And sometimes if your grades aren't what you hope they be, and oftentimes what you need them to be, it can feel like your world is falling apart. And like I said, it can feel like the future that you want is just going to always be out of reach. And so in these cases, I find taking a step back and really reflecting on your challenge points are crucial. But most importantly, I think mentorship is something that is really underrated in our departments sometimes, and in university. And so one of the biggest things that helped get me through was always reaching out and creating strong bonds with older students who had been in my shoes, who could, sometimes, pass me the old assignment or help me out a little bit along the way, which really, really helped. But then also really try my best to even befriend my professors, helping you, working with them to create really strong mentorship bonds was something that really helped me get through as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. I know in our program especially, it gets a little bit competitive with sort of like the grades and the experiences that people have. Like you could be doing so much for yourself, and then you see someone else doing something like research at Princess Margaret or something. And
Right.
sometimes you just can't help yourself but think, oh, like I don't have all of these experiences. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is just realizing that not everything's a competition. Just as long as you're better than yourself from yesterday, I think that's the biggest thing that I can do for myself. Just taking a step back, like you guys said, and realizing that grades aren't everything, especially when we're applying to all of these professional schools like masters and stuff like that. You have the opportunity to show them who you really are in your application, especially with your extracurriculars. I think that's the biggest thing. A
Right.
lot of the people in our program, like we're doing a lot of clubs and stuff, but to me, sometimes it seems like we're doing things just to put it on our resume rather than things that are actually important to us. So I think being able to recognize what you're actually interested in and doing it not just for grad school, but to actually gain like good experiences is really important.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think you mentioned the network effect of mental health, and I think that's a really good point. like I said before, a lot of my comfort in mental health comes from my sisters and how open they are. And luckily, they have experience in university that haven't had because they're older than me. So I often go to them for help. But how would you, sort of branching into our next question, would you have any suggestions for how students can support each other in case they don't have those extra people to look up to? And more importantly, focusing on how to do it in a respectful manner and how to approach them in a way that will make them feel comfortable?
Yeah, it's a great question, Cameron. And I think you said something like a good point is about how competitive everyone is. And I think that's just like not something that's explicitly said, like, oh, I need to compete with this person. It's just more so like the environment we all assume we're in. But if we can all see that someone else's success isn't indicative of our success, I think we'll be more inclined to uplift one another. And that actually, like, by making those genuine connections and seeing other people's strengths, you can then leverage them. Like, I know Ampai and I, like, we're both entrepreneurial at heart, and like her and I could have competed with one another to start two separate charities or something like that. But her and I, we have different strengths and weaknesses that counteract one another. And I think if you can approach it from that lens of, at least for me, I wasn't the best in finance or accounting when I was at school. So rather than feeling like I needed to compete with everybody and isolate myself and, hire all these tutors, I realized that there's so many people who are so talented and understood the complexity of these numbers that instead of hiding what I knew about perhaps marketing or entrepreneurship, I offered almost like a little bit more of like a trade, like I'll support you with this if you could help me with this. And then not only that, I felt like I developed genuine friendships from that because I was acknowledging how strong they were in certain areas and really appreciating their support and that kind of stuff. So I think, yeah, recognizing like as soon as you realize that their success really has nothing to do with you, then you can let that idea of being competitive go and then really just lean on one another and leverage each other's strengths and weaknesses. But I'll let
Right.
Ampai speak more.
Oh, Haley, that's so smart. One thing I noticed at Queens is that all of our faculties deal with this so differently. For example, I looked at my friends in commerce. I was like, oh man, that looks rough. And then I looked at my friends in lifestyle and I was like, man, that looks rough because it was the situation where, it's like a piranha tank. You're just, you know, you're out here you're just trying to topple each other down. But the biggest thing that you have to remember, and I feel like, well, once I got kind of to the end of university, I'd be looking at people who were trying to jip me or, were even, giving the wrong test answers to things. I was like, you're so silly. Like, what you doing that for? Like, what are you thinking? Because first of all, if you even take competitiveness too far, it's gonna burn your bridges. Connections are the most important thing in the world, and people are burning bridges. It's just not the smart thing to do, right? If you look at the pool that you're in and you look at the span of the world, look at all the competition you're going to have outside your bubble. So why don't you work on making those within your bubble the strongest that you can be? Because trust me, they are not your only competition.
Mhm.
It extends so far beyond the people that you know. And I find, notice those people who are going to just try to take advantage of you or over compete with you and be like, okay, silly, goodbye. Like, goodbye. Just go over there. I'm going to stay in my corner. I'm going to do my thing. And I'm going to find a smaller group of people who are actually going to support me, just the way that Haley and I do. The kind of people that I know I can trust to build myself up and people that I want to build up as well. And so sometimes it's difficult to cultivate that. But I think really taking a moment to look at the people around you and say, who's a little piranha and who's actually going to be a good person that's going to support me and create a symbiotic academic relationship. So I think that's really crucial, but really remembering that success it's so widespread, and remembering that people who oftentimes are just, being overly competitive, they might be doing it from a really scary place for them too. They might be doing it from a place of deep insecurity. They might be doing it from a place of being taught that that was the only way. And so, just not trying to put yourself above it, but just putting yourself aside of all of it if you can, and remembering that there's a lot more competition out there than the people right next to you.
Yeah, I think collaboration is really important. Like for example, for me, both of my housemates are both in Health Sci, and whenever I tell other Health Sci students, they're like, "Oh, like you're living with other Health Sci's, like that's kind of like odd." Like just because in the few years that our program has existed, we've already cultivated such a competitive environment where it seems like you're not even able to like cohabitate with other people in our program. So I think, yeah, that's like one of the top priorities that like the health sciences faculty should focus on, just breaking down that competitive environment and really being there to support one another rather than trying to tear each other down. I think that was really important. So it looks like we're past our half an hour mark. So we just want to say thank you to Ampai and Hailey for sharing their knowledge on this topic and joining us for our very first mental health podcast. Be sure to check out Step Above Stigma around campus and online on Instagram at qu.stepabovestigma, or their general Instagram is Step Above Stigma.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. So that concludes today's podcast. For further information on mental health resources at Queens in the meantime, please take a look at our mental health resources guide on the HSS Instagram at Queens HSS.
And yeah, we hope you guys will join us for our next podcast. That will be on the topic of student life with Dr. Duffy and Dr. Cunningham.